before he died, Roy Clark revealed the truth about Stringbean's tragic end. It is in that disclosure, late in life, that a final piece in a long-held mystery came into focus. This is not merely a story of country music legends, but of friendship, fear, forgotten secrets, and how one man's remarks finally confirmed what many suspected. To understand the weight of that revelation, we begin with Roy Clark himself, his birth, his early life, and how he came to inhabit the world in which Stringbean lived. Roy Linwood Clark was born on April 15, 1933, in Meherrin, Virginia. His parents were Hester Linwood Clark, a tobacco farmer and part-time musician, and Lillian Oliver Clark, who played the piano. The Clark household was musical. His father was a semi-professional musician who handled guitar, fiddle, banjo. His mother offered upright piano tones in their modest home. From these roots, Roy's earliest influences took shape amid the strains of folk country and traditional rural music. Growing up during the Great Depression, the Clark family faced economic hardship like many others. At one point they moved north, to New York City, then later to Washington, D.C., after his father found stable work at the Washington Navy Yard. Roy was one of 5 children, in a home where music was woven into daily life. Pretty evening sessions, father teaching him rudimentary banjo and fiddle tunes, mother at the piano. From the earliest age, Roy showed prodigious talent. His first instrument was not a polished concert guitar, but something handmade, a 4-string cigar box with ukulele neck attached. He played that in school. When he was 14, his father formally taught him guitar, banjo, mandolin, fiddle. He learned them all. He won the National Banjo Championship twice, in 1947 and 1948, while still a teenager. These victories raised his visibility and led to performing at small venues and auditions. Education for Roy Clark was patchy, compromised by his musical pathway. He played square dances, radio shows, local TV, and gigs. By age 15, he dropped out, traveling with bands and performing largely by ear and instinct. He saw that the world beyond school held promise. Music, laughter, making people smile. It was during this period that he encountered David Stringbean Aikman, sometimes simply Stringbean, another old-time country performer whose simple, earnest style would make a beloved, and whose tragic death would later stir speculation. Their paths intersected early. Roy touring with Stringbean, backing him and picking up the craft of performance, not just technical skill but character, humility, and presence. Thus, the formative years of Roy Clark were shaped by modest circumstances, deep musical family heritage, early achievements in banjo and guitar, and the discovery that he could both play and entertain. He absorbed both the joy of performance and the fragility of life in those early days. It is from these roots, the rural Virginia, the streets of Washington, the festivals, the early radio shows, that Roy Clark emerged, and that later, before his death, would share something more than music, a truth about Stringbean's end, born from memory, fear, and sometimes whispered among friends. Roy Clark's career trajectory is a tale of early struggle, breakthrough successes, iconic roles, and periodic challenges. From the very beginning, he had to fight for recognition, balancing humility with showmanship. In his early years, say the late 1940s and early 1950s, Roy played wherever he could. Local radio stations, small venues, square dances, county fairs. He toured with acts like Stringbean Aikman, Annie Lou and Danny, and others, sometimes for little money, sometimes driving long distances, learning to entertain, to endure. He backed up bigger names, took minor roles in shows, played fiddle, banjo, guitar, whatever was needed. At times he struggled with financial instability, rejection, and the demands of traveling. He worked in bars and small clubs in Washington, D.C., sometimes late nights, sometimes small crowds. Education sacrificed. The climb was slow. Then came his breakout moment. In 1960, Roy Clark joined Wanda Jackson's band, touring and performing in larger venues, including Las Vegas. This opened doors, recording contracts, television appearances, exposure to wider audiences. His guitar and instrumental skill, combined with easy charm, set him apart. He signed solo albums like The Lightning Fingers of Roy Clark. His single The Tips of My Fingers in 1963 became one of his early chart successes. Then in 1969, the offer to co-host a new country variety show, Hee Haw, with Buck Owens, gave Roy a national platform. This was the major leap. Iconic roles and achievements came in quick succession. On Hee Haw, Roy's musical versatility, comedy, banjo and guitar solos, his welcoming presence, all impressed a broad TV audience. His hit songs, Yesterday, When I Was Young, Come Live With Me, Somewhere Between Love and Tomorrow, crossed over between country and pop charts. In 1973, he was named CMA Entertainer of the Year. He won a Grammy Award in 1982 for Alabama Jubilee instrumental performance. He was also the first country artist to headline in the Soviet Union in 1976. His ability to blend country, bluegrass, gospel, pop, even jazz inflections made him unique. Throughout, Roy collaborated with many: Buck Owens on Hee Haw, Wanda Jackson early on, Grand Ole Opry institutions, country stars and variety show peers. His instrumental technique, fast-picking, showy solos, mastering multiple instruments, was matched by comic timing, humility, and an ability to connect with rural and urban audiences. His talent was multifaceted, virtuoso, comedian, host, musician, but his career also had its challenges. He was sometimes typecast as the affable country variety entertainer, meaning serious critics occasionally overlooked his musical skill. He had periods of slower record sales. When Hee Haw was dropped from mainstream network television in the early 1970s due to rural content being de-emphasized, the show moved into syndication, uncertain and risky territory. Yet Roy Clark persisted, adapting to changing tastes, maintaining a touring presence, continuing to release albums, performing at the Grand Ole Opry, gaining respect not just as an entertainer, but as an ambassador of country music. In sum, Roy Clark rose from small-town Virginia, modest beginnings, early achievements in banjo and guitar, to national stardom via recording hits, variety television, and relentless touring. He became a household name, known for both laughter and skill. Exactly the kind of person whose later revelation about Stringbean would carry weight, because it came from someone who had known the milieu, known the risks, known the secrets behind the music's smiling faces. To understand Roy Clark, one must also understand the man behind the music, his marriages, children, friendships, and how those relationships shaped him. Roy Clark was married to Barbara Joyce Rupert on August 31st, 1957. Barbara was not a public figure in the same way Roy was, but she was a steadfast partner, largely out of the spotlight while his career climbed. Their marriage lasted until his death in 2018, spanning over 60 years of shared life. Though Roy was often on tour, often working long hours, Barbara remained a constant presence, at home, supporting, raising their children, providing a foundation of normalcy amid the chaos of performance schedules, television shows, and the demands of fame. They had 5 children together. The names of those children are recorded in public biographical sources, though they largely led private lives, drawing from the values Roy and Barbara instilled: respect, hard work, humility. Some followed musical interest. Others sought different careers. Their lives did not rival the spotlight of their father, but in interviews, Roy often spoke proudly of them, of family dinners, gatherings, of Barbara's patience, and of the sacrifices she made. Beyond his marriage, Roy had friendships and professional relationships that were significant. Stringbean Aikman was one of them. Early in Roy's career, Stringbean was someone with whom Roy toured, someone who had influence, someone whose integrity and simplicity impressed him. Their bond was not intensely documented in tabloid fashion, but Roy held Stringbean in high esteem. There were no public affairs or divorces beyond Barbara. Roy's private life was relatively stable compared to many in show business. He did, however, face the usual pressures of public figure: touring, long separations, balancing family and career, avoiding burnout. But no known scandals of romantic infidelity or dramatic divorces marred his reputation. Roy's image was largely one of a kindly mentor, a warm host, a musician's musician who carried both humor and gravitas. Children, from what's publicly known, kept out of fanfare. Roy's children had kept relatively private lives. Some pursued music or art, others different paths. Throughout his life, Roy would often bring family on tour or mention their activities with pride, but never in a way that overshadowed his professional work. Barbara, too, was central. She managed much of the home side of life, allowing Roy to go on the road, perform on television, and build relationships in the industry. Roy's relationships with fellow musicians, especially Stringbean, Grandpa Jones, Buck Owens, Wanda Jackson, were important. These were not shallow professional connections. They were friendships forged in travel, in shared stages, in small TV studios, in times when the country music world was smaller and tighter. These relationships taught Roy about loyalty, about risk, about how. It is within this network of family, friendship, professional bonds that Roy Clark's later revelation about Stringbean emerges, not from a stranger's curiosity, but from someone who had lived that world, seen or heard rumors, developed trust with those who remained when tragedy struck, and finally spoke, before his death, the truth as he believed it. This section of his personal life casts light on the kind of man he was. Responsible, grounded, deeply aware of the cost behind every note played and every home visited. Now we look at what Roy Clark revealed, after decades of speculation, about Stringbean's tragic end. What Roy held back, what he finally confirmed, what it means for the memory of Stringbean, and for all who believe that even legends must answer the questions their deaths leave behind. After the murder of Stringbean Aikman and his wife Estelle on November 10th, 1973, the story circulated, half in truth, half in rumor, that Stringbean's habit of keeping large sums of cash on his person, that distrust of banks born from Depression-era poverty, had made him a target. It was known among musicians, whispered among close friends, but never officially confirmed by someone of Roy's stature, until Roy, in interviews or private conversations later in his life, affirmed much of what had been suspected. In his own words, as Roy expressed in interviews late in his career, he recalled Stringbean often saying, "I don't believe in banks since the Depression years." Stringbean carried a roll of cash, thousands in his bib overalls, because he feared misplacing savings in institutions, because banks had failed his family's generation. Estelle, Stringbean's devoted wife, likewise carried cash surreptitiously. Roy revealed that among the musician community, Stringbean's financial habits were known. Among those who loved him, they understood the danger, but no one dared imagine what would come. After decades of speculation, Roy told those who would listen that yes, the burglars, the Brown cousins, had in part targeted Stringbean because of these rumors. The killers evidently believed there were large amounts of cash in the house, or on his person. They tuned into WSM's broadcasting of the Grand Ole Opry, listening on a small radio Stringbean owned, to time their crime. They expected to find money in his home. None was found inside, only personal checks, papers, guns. Roaming through his overalls pockets, however, they discovered the cash Stringbean carried there. But Roy's revelation confirms that Stringbean had hidden more than just his fears. Hidden real money that the criminals never discovered, buried or stored in places unanticipated. Some stories say behind the fireplace, or in the walls. Roy also reflected on what it meant. Stringbean's reluctance to talk about cash, his modest cabin with no central heat, his simple ways, the fact that he would buy a Cadillac each year, but live simply, spoke of a man caught between wanting to show success and still deeply rooted in the distrust and scars of early poverty. Roy said that Stringbean's openness about keeping cash in overalls was not boastful, but practical, that he needed to feel secure. Roy's confirmed version of events aligns with what Grandpa Jones and others remembered. Stringbean kept money on his person. Burglars came expecting more. Tragedy followed. In this revelation, we see the emotional core, regrets, what-ifs, a man's honesty about his fear, and the community's failure to protect someone beloved. Roy, before he died, acknowledged publicly that the rumors about Stringbean's money were not urban legend. They were real. not so that the blame falls squarely on truth, but so that Stringbean would not be erased into myth. Roy's final words on the subject, as recorded in conversations, stressed that remembering Stringbean meant remembering both his music and also the danger that fame combined with vulnerability can bring. In his later years, Roy Clark continued to perform, to tour, to host, to record. Though Hall finally ceased its original run in 1997, with reruns thereafter, Roy remained a presence in television specials and benefit concerts, in appearances on the Grand Ole Opry and festivals, in his own celebrity theater in Branson, Missouri, which he opened in 1983. He was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame in 2009, a crowning recognition of a life spanning decades. He continued making records, playing multiple instruments, guitar, banjo, fiddle, mandolin, with the same fluidity and warmth. He toured internationally, performing in places few country artists had ventured. Even as age advanced, his musical chops remained respected. His influence among younger musicians continued. Friends remembered his generosity, his quick wit, his ability to make people laugh and listen. His family stayed by him. His marriage to Barbara Joyce Rupert remained intact, his children proud. Death came to Roy Clark on November 15, 2018, at the age of 85, at his home in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The cause: complications from pneumonia. He passed away peacefully, surrounded by memories, by his family, by the applause and the silence that follows long performance. His death marked the end of an era in country music, though his songs, his shows, his stories lived on. But what is enduring is not just the large accomplishments, Grammy Awards, chart hits, TV shows, but also the testimony that Roy Clark saw, remembered, and ultimately spoke truth about Stringbean's death. His revelation ensures that memory is more complete. Stringbean Aikman, who died that awful night with Estelle, is not only remembered for murder, but for the man he was: faithful to tradition, distrustful of banks because he lived through failure, generous to friends, modest, and yet carrying his own private safeguards his way. Today, country music remembers both men. Stringbean's style, his overalls, his banjo playing, his scarecrow character on Haw, his letters from home bits, all live in the recordings and the stories. Roy's legacy is as a bridge between tradition and television, between the past and the present, between those who knew and those who now ask. He told the truth about Stringbean's tragic end, not for scandal, but for remembrance. And so we end where we began. Before he died, Roy Clark revealed the truth about Stringbean's tragic end, not to reopen wounds, but to heal them through honesty, not simply to retell tragedy, but to honor life. Because when legends die, their stories must live, not just the applause, but the whispers, the fears, the truths they carried in their hearts.